Hi everyone. In this video we'll be looking at the lymph node, and so this is what you're looking at here. Lymph nodes are relatively large structures. They're actually, a few centimeters in size. So even at this low magnification, you can just barely see the whole thing. This is a fairly small one. I have another slide where you'll probably have a hard time seeing the whole thing even at this magnification. This is the 40x magnification right now, so that's the lowest magnification I've got. Now from this magnification, let's talk a little bit about the organization. So what you're seeing around the edges is a fairly kind of eosinophilic material. This is connective tissue. That's a dense irregular connective tissue capsule. Okay. Now the capsule of a lymph node is often described as being discontinuous. Now, that doesn't mean that I actually see whole gaps in this, but what it means is that there are many lymphatic vessels that pass through this capsule, and so some of these holes that you're seeing here, for example, are likely to be lymphatic vessels, okay? So those are penetrating through. They're coming from various parts of the nearby area, and they're going to be spilling their lymph into this kind of lighter staining region just underneath the capsule. It's especially prominent here, for example. Okay, so this region right here, very poorly staining, fairly acellular, is called the subcapsular sinus because it's just below the capsule. Okay, so things spill out into this region here, and then the lymph, the fluid that comes in from the lymphatic vessels, will travel through this region right here where you see lymphatic nodules. Okay, this is the cortex. So you see a few kind of round structures. These are the nodules here and here. This is the cortex. Again, here's another fairly obvious round structure here. That's a nodule. This is a nodule. On this side, we've got another nodule here. Here's another one. So this is the cortex. Now, it also will then pass through the paracortex, this region right here. It's a little bit less organized, and different types of lymphocytes are in here. So the cortex tends to contain a lot of B lymphocytes, whereas the paracortex tends to contain a lot of T lymphocytes. And then once passing through the cortex and paracortex, lymph will flow into this region right here, which is the medulla. And so in the medulla, what you're seeing is these lighter regions, like this, for example, here, or like this here. This is called this is called a medullary sinus. And the darker regions around the outside of those sinuses, like this part right there, this part right there, this is called the medullary cord. So the lymph will flow through the sinuses. The cords are like the walls around the outside of these tunnels. Okay, so this is the general organization of a lymph node. Let's zoom in a little bit. There's not that much that we're going to be able to see here because it's all a lot of lymphocytes, but let's just take a closer look anyway. Okay, so again, what we're seeing here is the medulla. Again, this lighter region here, that's the sinus. This more cellular region here, more nuclei visible here, that's the cord. The medullary cords will tend to be composed of a lot of macrophages, for example. And those macrophages will have cytoplasmic processes that kind of stretch across from one side of this to the other. And so they will be able to trap whatever pathogens might still be there. Basically, the function of the lymph node is to filter lymph. Lymph is basically tissue fluids. So tissue fluids, especially after an inflammatory response. So let's say you have some sort of infection, your neutrophils come into the area, they start the fight, they kill off a whole bunch of bacteria or viruses or what have you. There will be fragments of those the bacteria or viruses. There'll be fragments of them that will be suspended in that tissue fluid at the end of that infection, at the end of that fight. And so all that fluid will drain into a lymphatic node. And so all those protein fragments from those viruses or those bacteria will come into contact with all of these cells in here. And so those B lymphocytes in the cortex and the T lymphocytes in the paracortex, they will be brought into contact with those antigens. And so what happens here is that those antigens will flow past all of these cells And basically what they will be doing is that they will be presented to these cells to see if any of them recognizes that particular antigen and if it can actually respond to it appropriately. So if it can produce the right antibody, or if it's able to recognize this is something that doesn't belong and attack it. And so in those cases, those cells will be able to proliferate, and then they will exit the lymph node through the efferent lymphatic vessels, okay? Or efferent lymphatic vessel singular, okay? So just to be clear, the lymphatic vessels that pass through the capsule in here, for example, these ones here, those would be the afferent lymphatic vessels. They're coming in, bringing lymph into the lymph node, and there will be one efferent lymphatic vessel which will be leaving the lymph node at the hilus. And in this case here, the hilus is kind of difficult to make out where that would be. Probably around this region right here. But it's not in the plane of section here. In fact, what you're seeing here is likely to be the efferent lymphatic vessel, potentially. Looks like it's a lot of massive eosinophilic material in here, so that's likely to be lymph. And the nuclei in here are likely to be the lymphocytes that will be carried away from the lymph node once they become activated and they are appropriately responding to whatever was brought into the lymph node.